What's up, everyone? We are diving back into the multiverse today for another epic. Which is what if Naruto became Dragon Champion and built Ultimate Harem with Anko X, Kurenai X Ayame X Tamari, and Tenten Part 1. If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. Naruto could only in pleasure at the moment as Kurenai and Anko continued to play with his ears at the moment, while Shizune was busy touching his back and shoulder blades and placing gentle kisses that got his blood going. And the sight of the blonde Hokage in her birthday suit and between his parted legs made Naruto feel very alive for some reason. He shivered as Kurenai and Anko began to rub their bodies on his own, and that allowed their S to move up and down on his arms at that moment, and it was taking so much of his willpower to not lose it at that moment. However, it seemed that it was exciting the four mature women even more as Tsunade touched Naruto's erect at the moment and she smiled at Naruto. "You look so hard, Naruto-kun. I was amazed when I saw this, you know." Tsunade. The blonde Hokage smiled as she began to run her hands slowly on Naruto's, and it was quick to react as well, much to her delight as she touched it. The blonde Hokage had to admit that it had been years since she had ever been with a man, and she was eager to feel the pleasure and bliss of being with a man. It was even more of a turn on to know that the man liked her back, and now was the time for her to see just how much of a man Naruto had become. Naruto turned his head to the right and Kurenai was quick to take advantage and kissed Naruto deeply in the mouth, and the red-eyed Jonin reached down and grabbed Naruto's right hand and placed it on her, and Naruto began to massage Kurenai's S slowly, making the red-eyed woman in pleasure as they kissed each other, as Anko took her own route into pleasuring the blonde Chunin as she kissed and at his chest, giving Naruto a number of kiss marks on his body. She then takes his left arm and places his fingers in her mouth and proceeds to on them for a few minutes before moving his hand to her S and making Naruto touch her with his fingers. Shizune was not planning on being left out on the action as she continued to kiss in Naruto's back and skin while pressing her hands in certain parts of the body. As a skilled medic nin, she was familiar with the human body and how it worked, though not in the same caliber as that of Tsunade, and being trained in the art since she was young by Tsunade, she was familiar with how to use chakra to enhance a person's reactions to stimulus, and she was going to put that knowledge to good use. She let some of her chakra flow out and she ran her hands on certain nerve clusters and endings on Naruto's back, and she was aiming for the pleasure centers and clusters and began to stimulate them carefully and gently, and the results were obvious as Naruto became all the more active at the moment, and Shizune smiled as she even used her chakra to her lips in order to spread out more of the pleasurable sensations on Naruto's body. Tsunade smiled in approval as she continued to caress Naruto's and then his sack gently, making the blonde Chunin out loud in pleasure at the sensations that were flooding his body at this very moment. Tsunade decided to take it one step further and smiled as this had been a while since she had done this to a man, and now she wanted to see if she still could do it. She kissed Naruto's on the tip and got an immediate reaction from the blonde Chunin, and she smiled as she used her tongue and lips to pleasure Naruto even further, and the blonde didn't disappoint as he ed out loudly while still being kissed by Kurenai. The separated and Naruto gasped at the sensations as Tsunade kissed and at his from tip to the base, and the sight of the gorgeous blonde Hokage doing those things to his while she was gloriously was doing wonders to Naruto's mind at the moment. Tsunade saw that and looked at Naruto as she'd and kissed his slowly and sensually. "Watch this, Naruto-kun." Naruto could only look as Tsunade opened her mouth and slowly took in his, and the sight of the blonde Sannin doing this to him at this moment and time drove Naruto out to shout in absolute pleasure as Tsunade slowly took in Naruto's and she the tip, sides and lower portion as she took in his length. Tsunade-chan. Naruto couldn't help but say that endearment as Tsunade was doing things to his that was driving him to lose control of his normal train of thought at the moment. It was incredible, it was so hot, wet, and so right, it was driving him crazy at that moment. Tsunade was enjoying this greatly. She had to admit that Naruto's growth was certainly good and his body showed it as well. He was already 9 to 10 inches long, and for someone his age, that was more than perfecta at the moment. As soon as she took in all of his length and was able to easily control her body's gag reflex, she let Naruto's get used to it being there. She knew for a fact that Naruto's actions told her that he was a virgin, and the fact that she was about to have with a man who she did love back and was a virgin at the same time sent a thrill of pleasure down her spine. Tsunade continued to relax, and as soon as she felt comfortable, She moved her head back and forth and caressed Naruto's testicles slowly. Once in a while she would release Naruto's from her mouth and then gently it from tip to base and the sides as well. Tsunade. Tsunade looked at Naruto, who was blushing bright red, and she blushed a bit as well. It had been so long, but she was happy that she still had what it took to make a man squirm and shout her name in pleasure. It was a real turn on for the blonde Hokage and Sannin to know that she still had it. And now she had every intention to make this night memorable for Naruto and herself. I want to hear you scream my name, Naruto-kun, only louder this time. With those words, she also used her training with the human body to use her chakra to aim at Naruto's pleasure centers, and she even took it one step further, and with a light application of her chakra to her tongue, she increased the sensations with greater results as Naruto tried to move his hips, but she was easily able to restrain him with her hands. It was then that Shizune got involved as she pressed a certain cluster of nerves on Naruto's back, and Naruto couldn't help but out at that. Shizune then kissed Naruto deeply and then spoke. I think it'll help, Tsunade-sama. With that, Shizune moved away, but not before sending a wave of pleasurable sensations up and down Naruto's spine with her fingers, tongue, and lips. Shizune then made her way to where Tsunade was and she spoke to Tsunade. Can I join in? Of course. And it was not long before the two women, master and apprentice, placed their knowledge of medical jutsu to the job at hand. And what a pleasurable job it was at the moment. Tsunade reached down with her hands and used her chakra training to tickle the pleasure centers in Naruto's thighs, and the sensation was driving Naruto wild, as Shizune used the same moves on him, doubling the pleasure he was feeling at the moment. Kurenai and Anko looked at Naruto and were smiling at the way the blonde Chunin was blushing and ing out loud. For Kurenai, the sight was very arousing, and for Anko, she was enjoying every second of this. The two friends couldn't help but smirk as they had a very wicked idea. Naruto ed in pleasure as Shizune and Tsunade were there, ing and taking turns with his at the moment as well as his testicles. The sight of the two women doing very sinful and delicious things to his with their mouths and tongue was driving him to the brink. But he not going to be alone for long, as Anko and Kurenai put their own plan into action as they kissed him first, and it was in a three-way kiss, and when that hot tongue battle between the three was over, Kurenai was in front of Naruto and standing in front of him. This naturally allowed Naruto to see Kurenai's vagina for the first time, and to his amazement, she kept herself very well groomed. A small triangle of soft, wet fur was right there in front of him, and he could see the wetness that was there, showing him that the red-eyed woman was already very aroused. Naruto-kun, please. What? Anko smiled and spoke to Naruto. Kurenai-chan wants you to her there, Naruto-kun. She's really eager at the moment, and you would make her very happy right about now. Naruto gulped and decided to lean forward, and the moment he touched Kurenai's wet vaginal folds, the red-eyed woman ed out loudly, and the blonde Chunin couldn't help but taste Kurenai's inner wetness, and to his amazement, he liked the taste, and he slowly Kurenai's wet folds gently, taking in more of the red-eyed woman's moisture, and Kurenai was ing out deeply as she held Naruto's head closer to her body. The blonde Chunin reached with his hands and held Kurenai's hips with his hands, and Kurenai was enjoying the situation. Anko was not offended at the moment as she watched the whole scene, and she couldn't help but get even more aroused by the sight before her at the moment. Naruto was being given what many would call the best blowjob in existence by two of the most skilled medic nin in Konoha's history, and he was seeing the of one of the most attractive jonin in the whole village. The Kurenai maid was very arousing, and Anko was not planning to be idle forever as she looked at it, and he reached for Naruto's hand and then ned his fingers once more, and she spoke to him. Here's something you are going to love feeling, Naruto-kun. Anko moved Naruto's now wet hand, and as soon as she had guided his hand to her own soaking wet vagina, and without any hesitation, she guided his fingers right into her vagina, and she hissed deeply at the pleasure that flooded her senses at that moment. And as soon as Naruto's fingers were as deep as they could go while they were in her wet vagina, she began to guide Naruto's hand to move his fingers in and out, and she ed as the sensations that came as a result of what she was doing with Naruto's hand. It naturally didn't take too long for Naruto get the hang of things at that moment, and she no longer had to guide him on how to use his hand. Naruto was in heaven at this moment and time. He was in what most men would literally kill to be in at the moment. And this was going to be something that he was not going to forget anytime soon. His right hand was moving in and out of Anko's wet vagina, while he was seeing Kurenai in the same place, as well as this strange bulb that whenever his tongue touched, the red-eyed woman would scream even more in pleasure. and that excited him to go even further with his actions on her wet. And naturally, there were Tsunade and Shizune taking their turns on his, and the feel of each woman taking their turn was so arousing and filling him with amazing sensations with not just their physical actions but with their use of their chakra to further stimulate the pleasure centers of his body at the moment. It was not long before both Anko and Kurenai reached their limits as both women screamed out their release, and the blonde Chunin couldn't help but feel aroused as he lapped up as much of Kurenai's moisture as he could manage at that moment, and the feeling of his hand being covered by Anko's own moisture drove him to the edge as he finally came hard and shouted in pleasure. Tsunade and Shizune sensed that situation moments before, and Tsunade took the first shot and engulfed Naruto's, and she ed out loud as she felt Naruto's hot and thick cum fill her mouth, and to her amusement and delight, it was actually sweet tasting and very nice to her taste buds. She lapped up as much as she could and heard Shizune groan, showing that her adult apprentice wanted a taste of that, and she nodded and she moved away and allowed some of Naruto's cum to fly to her face, and that made her smile as Shizune made her moan, moved and took Naruto's into her mouth as it released more seed, and like Tsunade, Shizune found the seed much to her liking at that moment, and she took as much as he could take. Naruto lay back on the bed and was panting. That was his very first orgasm, and it floored him like a massive hammer would hit a man on the head and drive that person down to the ground. He could only gasp as he took in as much air as he could, and when he could look, he spotted Tsunade and Shizune with their faces covered in his cum, and the sight of that was enough to get him back up to speed as his twitched in reaction. Anko gave a slight scowl and spoke. "Hey, I want a taste of that." Tsunade looked at Anko, then Kurenai, and then to Shizune. The Jonin apprentice of Tsunade blushed and nodded as the two women moved away. Tsunade went to Kurenai and Shizune went to Anko, and much to Naruto's shock and awe, Tsunade started first by opening her mouth and allowing some of the cum he had released out, and Kurenai was quick to catch on and she opened her own mouth to take in his cum. Shizune does the same thing, and Anko is giving a of pleasure at this, and when both women tastes Naruto's cum, they smiled as they swallowed what Tsunade and Shizune had handed them, and the sight was so strong and sending powerful erotic thoughts to his brain. Tsunade wiped her face clean and did the leftover cum from her hands, and Shizune did the very same thing, and Shizune spoke. "Naruto-kun tastes very sweet, doesn't he?" Kurenai nodded and Anko gave a very lustful grin at Naruto, with Tsunade smiled as she'd her lips as well. The red-eyed Jonin then spoke to Naruto. "I think you need to let us have more of your delicious essence, Naruto-kun. What we had was only a light taste. Yeah, we're going to have some fun with you, so have plenty of that delicious milk ready." With that, Anko and Kurenai went to his and were eager to have their own taste of his and his cum as well, and Naruto could only stare until Tsunade and Shizune were there to have their own fun, while Kurenai and Anko had their fun with Naruto's quickly hardening. Naruto could only out loud as both Kurenai and Anko'd his on either side, and then they took turns, ing and kissing Naruto's from tip to sides and base, as well as the two of them taking turns to play with his testicles. Tsunade, however, had other plans. "I want you to taste me too, Naruto-kun, but I think I'll let Shizune go first. Are you ready for that, Shizune?" Shizune blushed and spoke to Naruto. "Make me feel good, Naruto-kun. I am so wet." Shizune straddled Naruto's head and gently lowered herself to Naruto, and Naruto was quick to see that Shizune's own vagina was soaking wet, and he could smell her arousal greatly at this moment, and he couldn't help but blush as he looked at Shizune's wet vagina, and he couldn't help himself and reached out to her folds. Shizune ed out loudly at this and said Naruto's name. "Right there, Naruto-kun. Yes." Tsunade smiled at this and decided to help as she straddled Naruto as well and was now behind Shizune and played with her apprentice's S to further stimulate Shizune, and to further add to the whole situation, she uses her chakra in the same technique to touch Shizune's pleasure centers, and the Jonin couldn't help but out loud at the sensations that were flooding her brain at the moment. Naruto, on the other hand, was utterly turned on by all this as Tsunade continued to play with Shizune's S, and both Anko and Kurenai continued to take their time with his, and they would take turns with it. First, Anko would take his deeply into her mouth and it from tip to base, and as soon as she had her fill, she played with Naruto's testicles with her tongue, and Kurenai took her turn and she did the same thing, making Naruto out even more at that, and he continued to Shizune's vagina, and his tongue finally hit the oris of the older woman, and the result made Shizune shout in pleasure. "That's it, Naruto-kun. More." Tsunade loved the sight and spoke. "That's it, Naruto-kun. Make Shizune scream out your name." Naruto ed as he continued to Shizune's vagina and tasted her juices, and it was certainly different from Kurenai's own taste, and that made Naruto realize that each woman had a unique taste to their inner selves, and it was quite interesting for him at the moment, and truth be told. The sight of Shizune all covered in sweat, blushing bright red, her face in the throes of pleasure and joy, her s heaving and being played with by Tsunade's hands was very erotic to him at this moment and time. Shizune was in heaven as she looked at Naruto, who continued to her vagina with gentleness, desire and passion as well. This made Shizune even more aroused as she reached with her hands to Naruto's head and stroked his hair gently. Stick it in. Yes, like me there Naruto-kun, more. Oh yes, more. Naruto did his best, and it seemed that he was doing all right as Shizune was ing out her pleasure, and he couldn't help but be even more aroused by the sight of Shizune being driven in pleasure by him and by Tsunade, and that mixed with the pleasurable sensations that Kurenai and Anko were placing on him at this moment and time. The blonde Chunin didn't know how much longer he was going to last in the pleasure that was flooding his brain, and the smell of was filling up the room and making the blonde Chunin and the women even more excited. Kurenai and Anko were enjoying themselves at the moment, and it showed as they continued to take turns teasing and touching Naruto's testicles. This was the ultimate fantasy for most men in Naruto's mind, and thanked Kami he was experiencing it firsthand. Man, I am not going to mention this night to anyone ever. Kakashi-sensei would freak. Kami only knows how the other guys will react, and if the pervy sage hears about this, I am going to grilled alive. But that was the last thing on Naruto's mind as he finally reached his limit as Shizune also reached hers and she orgasmed. Naruto-kun. Shizune arched her back and screamed as she felt her body nearly shatter in pleasure as she came, and Naruto couldn't help but lap up as much as he could at the moment of Shizune's moisture, and that was when he finally came as well. Kurenai and Anko were already waiting, and as soon as they sensed Naruto's orgasm, they were ready. Kurenai went first and got the first bursts of Naruto's cum into her mouth, and she added warmth, thickness, and taste. She was certainly going to like this for quite a while, and she took in as much as she could and then moved aside as Anko took her turn. The former student of Orochimaru was more than happy to take in as much of Naruto's cum as she could manage, and like before, she liked Kurenai, Shizune, and Tsunade loved the taste, and she was going to enjoy this night for all it was worth. Naruto-kun tastes very nice, doesn't he, Kurenai-chan? Yes. Yes he is. Oh yeah, I can get used to this. Anko had a very lustful gleam in her eye as she swallowed the amount of Naruto's cum she had in her mouth, and so did Kurenai, who also had a very seductive gleam in her eyes at the moment. Naruto was able to recover as Shizune moved away, as well as Tsunade, and all four women were on the bed around Naruto to look at the blonde Chunin as he got his body and energy back. As soon as he was able to get his wits back, Anko leaned forward and hid his face with her tongue. Even your skin tastes nice. If you were a buffet meal, I'd gladly go for seconds. Kurenai nodded as well. Her gaze was heated with passion, desire, and overwhelming lust as she looked at Naruto like he was something she needed in order to even breathe. Tsunade nodded at that as she and Shizune were even more eager to make Naruto and scream out their names. However, she kept in mind that Naruto needed to make all of them cum at the very same time, but that would be a long way from now. However, she had a very wonderful idea. We can't wear him down too much, ladies, so why don't we do this? Naruto-kun, I want you to make a number of Kage Bushin. What? You heard me. Don't worry, this will help out a lot. You're about to find out how Kage Bushin can be used outside of fighting, and I know you're going to love it. Naruto was finally able to get the energy to his body as his dragon fire reserve kicked up a notch with his chakra, and he was able to summon the Kage Bushin requested by the four women. Kage Bushin no Jutsu. In a few moments, a number of Kage Bushin were there. At least the four women couldn't help but give warm smiles to the Kage Bushin, Naruto, and one another. Tsunade looked at her compatriots and fellow kunoichi, and they also nodded. Naruto tried to figure out what was going on until Shizune moved and grabbed the arms of four of the Kage Bushin, while Kurenai took the hands of three of the other Kage Bushin, and Anko grabbed the four remaining Kage Bushin, and the three women were getting ready to have fun. And this allowed Tsunade and Naruto to be alone together, and Tsunade was not going to waste any time. She crawled over Naruto in a slow and almost cat-like grace, and she smiled at Naruto and spoke. Now Naruto-kun. For tonight, I am not the Hokage, nor a Sannin for that matter. I'll be a normal woman, but not just any woman. I'll be your woman, make me scream and your name, my lover. Tsunade-chan. Naruto looped his arms around Tsunade's neck and the two kissed one another deeply, and as soon as the two were kissing each other deeply. As soon as the kiss was over, the blonde Hokage was quick to act as she presented her S to Naruto, and he wasted no time as he reached for her lovely, full, and well-formed S handed her deep red S, much to Tsunade's delight and pleasure as she ed out her lover's name and enjoyed the actions of his tongue on her S as she was over him. Naruto then reached out and caressed Tsunade's back, and as soon as he was done laving considerable attention to her large and well-formed S, he moved back to her face and the two kissed deeply once more. Tsunade ed out in pleasure as they kissed once another, and she could hear the S of the other kunoichi and the Kage Bushin as well, and that excited the blonde Hokage even more at the moment as she continued her deep lip lock with her lover, and as soon as they separated, she was quick to act as she moved on her hands to touch Naruto's once more and gently caress it, making Naruto out loudly, and Tsunade marveled at how quickly Naruto got aroused. I like that, Naruto-kun, you're really eager for this, aren't you? Tsunade-chan. Tsunade smiled and made her move at this point and moved to be in front of Naruto's erect once more, and to Naruto's amazement and pleasure, she used her hands to place his between her large S, and he was overwhelmed by the softness that smothered his right there and then, and Tsunade was enjoying the feel of Naruto's between her S. She gave a seductive smile to Naruto and spoke to him. You like the feel of my S, Naruto-kun? Yes. Good. Now I'm going to make you feel even more. With that in mind, Tsunade was moving her S up and down Naruto's and with her hands pressing her S together. Naruto could only wail in pleasure and bliss as the feeling of Tsunade's S rubbing his was driving him to the brink of coming again, but he held on as he wanted to last longer this time as he focused on calming his racing heart and his nerves as they were on fire from the pleasure. Tsunade was enjoying the way Naruto ed and cried before her. Shizune was having her own fun as with her Kage Bushin at the moment, as one was busy give her a deep throat of a kiss while another was playing with her S. The Jonin was standing as both Kage Bushin were doing their best to make Shizune come hard. As the first moved away, another went down to Shizune's wet vagina, and much to her pleasure, the Kage Bushin began to her wet folds and her oris once more, and that made her react in deep pleasure at that moment, and then the other two Kage Bushin made their way to her S. One Kage took one on while the other Kage Bushin took the other, and the results for the Jonin were amazing. She was ing out in absolute pleasure and bliss at this very moment as the Kage Bushin behind her played with her back, and to her arousal was rubbing his on her butt, and it was making her even wetter at that moment. Oh yes, right there, Naruto-kun. The Jonin apprentice of Tsunade was in heaven as she had never done something like this before in her entire life, and this was exciting her bit by bit as she was being surrounded with pleasure at the moment as the Kage Bushin and ed her S in very arousing ways, while the Kage Bushin who was between her parted legs washing away at her ever-increasing moisture and pleasure, while the other was sending great shivers of pleasure running up and down her spine with his rubbing her butt at the moment. As soon as she was able to gasp for breath, the one behind her kissed her deeply as Shizune was once more being plunged into joy and pleasure at what was happening to her at this moment. As soon as the kiss was done, she screamed in pleasure. Naruto-kun. Shizune wasted little time as she came hard a few minutes later, and she was now on her knees and shared a deep kiss with the Kage Bushin that hated her wet vagina to her orgasm, and the two kissed one another deeply as Shizune didn't mind the taste of herself in the mouth of her Kage Bushin at the moment. As soon as that was done and out of the way, Shizune found herself being surrounded by the four Kage Bushin, and she saw herself surrounded by their S as the other one she had been kissing earlier had now stood up. Shizune blushed and made her move, running her hands on two S, and began to use her hands, making the two Kage Bushin in desire and pleasure while she'd and ed on the other two before her, further adding to the sounds and S in the room at the moment. Anko was enjoying herself immensely as well as she had a lot of fun with her own group of Kage Bushin at the moment. One was having his between Anko's own S at the moment, while another Kage Bushin was begin straddled by the Jonin and washing her dripping wet vagina at the moment, and he was lapping away, much to the Jonin's delight, while the other two were on the sides and pushing their S before her. And Anko merely smiled and replied seductively. Down boys, there's plenty of Anko-chan to go around. And to prove her point at that, Anko make the Kage Bushin below her stop, and she had him move the other way, and she then had his bend downward to the stomach, and when that was done, she placed her wet vagina on it and began to move her hips, and that allowed her vagina to massage the in the most pleasurable way possible, and the cage bushin could only scream. The cage bushin who had his between Anko's s was finally released, and Anko took hold of the other two who were on either side of her at the moment and sheet her lips. I am going to make you scream my name at the exact same time. With that plan in mind, the Jonin proceeded to take on all four of her current companions at the moment, and she was going to enjoy every second of this very delicious and rewarding outing at the moment. She removed cage bushins from her s and brought the three of them closer to her, and she proceeded to take them each in turn. All the while, she played with her s and the two other s that were close to her, and the sight of that was enough to arouse any normal human male at the moment, as Anko went on with gusto and energy with her actions on the cage bushin at the moment. Kurenai was having her own share of fun at that moment with her own cage bushin, as she had wanting her wet vagina as she lay down on her back, and another one was also placing its between her s at that moment, while the other cage bushin was currently kissing her deeply, and she was loving every second of this as her s were being moved about by the movements of the cage bushins between them at that moment. As she felt her body reaching release, she ed out loudly, and as the Jonin broke the kiss between her and the cage bushin. As soon as that was done, she had the cage bushin who was on top of her move away and sit next to her at the other side. As both the cage bushin were close enough, the Jonin held both their s with her hands and began to kiss, and on them while using her hands as the other cage bushin who wasing her vagina, and Oris then moved to rubbing his over it and making Kurenai out even more in pleasure and joy as she was getting into the swing of this as Anko and Shizune were. The overall result was the sounds of filling the room as well as the smells of filling through the room and spilling out through the house. Naruto was lucky that there were no roving bands of ninja there at the moment. Had there been any who would have infiltrated his home and saw this, well, it would have made one hell of a scandal in Konoha. While all this happened, Naruto finally reached his limits as he came hard from the feel of Tsunade's s rubbing his in the most sensual and hot fashion. Tsunade-chan. Tsunade smiled as Naruto came hard as she got some of her lover's seed on her face, and she took in his and swallowed the soon-to-come shoots of cum from her lovers, and she relished the sweet taste and the warmth and thickness of it all, and she ed hard on Naruto's to get all that she could get at this moment and time. Naruto felt his eyes flow back to the back of his head from the pleasure that stuck him, and he felt like he was going to pass out from all the pleasure, but he managed to use his chakra and dragon fire to bring power back to his body, and it showed as he was glowing with the normal blue chakra and then the white and golden flame, making the blonde Hokage smile in surprise. Allowing Naruto to make his move as he reached out and with amazing swiftness was able to reverse the situation, as Tsunade was now underneath him at this moment, and the blonde Hokage was very surprised at Naruto's actions and the speed in which he did those same actions. However, she was not unhappy as she purred at her lover and rubbed his face. Her hand was unharmed by the energy that was leaking out of Naruto, and she smiled. Ooh, adventurous aren't you? Ah, you know, if any person did this to me when I was clothed, I'd make sure to end their lives for that, Jiraiya included. But for you, I am willing to make a great exception. Tsunade-chan, care to make me feel better, Naruto-kun? Naruto nodded and knew already what was going to happen and what he was supposed to do at this moment and time as he kissed and did Tsunade's s, and he couldn't help but place his face into her s, making the blonde Hokage chuckle in delight at the sensations her lover was giving her at the moment, and she couldn't help but comment. You men, I can never understand why you like our s so much. Naruto didn't answer as he didn't need to, as he took in Tsunade's right, making the blonde Hokage blush bright red as he'd an ed on her right and then her left. He also laved her s with his tongue and then made his way to her well-formed stomach and hips and kissed his way there, and then he reached Tsunade's wet vagina and saw that she also kept her lower self clean and trim. Her triangle of wet fur was so exotic that Naruto couldn't help himself but kiss it, and that made Tsunade blush a bit more, and Naruto couldn't help but look at the sight before him at this moment. The tough and strong young again Tsunade, the current Hokage of the village, and someone he cared deeply about. Before him, covered in sweat, blushing deeply, her skin flush and pinkish red, her s moving up and down due to her breathing at the moment, it was erotic to the extreme. He placed those thoughts aside, and Tsunade merely parted her long and gorgeous legs, and he was now able to see her wet vagina, and the sight was enough to make Naruto gasp. But his lust, passion, and desire won over him thoughts as he moved to be close to Tsunade's wet folds and passionately began to them and kiss them as well, making Tsunade out a bit as she was enjoying this situation for as much as she could. It was when Naruto then kissed her Oris that the Hokage began to make much louder cries, and for good reason. It had been a very long time. Naruto continued with his actions and he felt very much rewarded for his efforts when Tsunade gave out a loud cry as he teased and her Oris in her vagina, and the fresh juices that came out from her was more than enough to tell the blonde Chunin that he was doing all right at the moment, and he had every intention to see the end through as he carried one. Yes, right there Naruto-kun. Tsunade said out loudly as she reached with her hands and grasped Naruto by the hair and gently held him close to her without accidentally harming him, since that was the last thing she wanted to do to her lover at the moment, and as she continued to reach the very limit of her endurance. Naruto finally succeeded and made Tsunade come hard. Naruto-kun. The blonde Hokage arched her back and she held onto the bed sheets tightly as her release hit her fast and hard and sent shivers of pleasure and bliss through every corner of her body at that moment and time. It was glorious to her as she lay there and let her body fly in the aftermath of her orgasm. Naruto saw that and he couldn't help but move back and gently kiss Tsunade, who was not bothered by the fact she was tasting herself at the moment. As the two parted, Tsunade nodded and got ready as Naruto once more placed himself between Tsunade's legs and he slowly gulped and took hold of his and slowly moved forward. He made it to the outer folds and he slowly pushed his in and the sensations were enough to floor him. It was like he was entering a brand new world of sensations as he slowly pushed his past Tsunade's soaking wet outer folds. Yes. Deeper Naruto-kun. Tsunade-chan. You feel so good. I'm going to faint. Not yet Naruto-kun. Naruto managed to control his body's desire to faint from all the delicious pleasure that was flooding it at the moment, and as soon as he was finally able to bury himself deeply into Tsunade's wet vagina, he shouted out his pleasure at the sensations that flooded his body, and Tsunade heard that and she smiled warmly as she was also blushing due to the pleasure and sensations that were flooding her own senses. She had never felt so full and complete in years. And soon enough, the familiar gnawing hunger for completion and release overcame her once more. Go on Naruto-kun. Naruto needed no further guidance as he was driven purely by instinct at that moment, and he began to move his hips slowly, pulling out at first, and the sensations that flowed through him were absolutely delicious, and as soon as he was nearly out, he pushed back in, making Tsunade out loudly as he began to pick up the pace and slowly pushed in and out of Tsunade's wet and throbbing vagina, and the blonde Hokage was also enjoying the pleasure and sensations that were flooding her body at this moment and time. Naruto-kun. That's it. Faster. Harder. Deeper. Tsunade-chan. You feel so hot. Tight. Oh Kami. The two lovers were enjoying the pleasure and bliss that was filling their bodies at the moment as Naruto began to pick up the pace, and it was then that Naruto decided to try using the same trick that Tsunade and Shizune had done to him before, and that was to use chakra to stimulate the pleasure centers of his body, and he was more than willing to try it out. And he focused his chakra at this moment and then moved it through his hands, lips, tongue, and his as he continued to thrust deeply into Tsunade's vagina. Naruto's actions were quick to affect Tsunade as her pleasure centers were now being touched in very powerful and delicious ways at this moment, and the blonde-haired Hokage was more than willing to reveal how much she was enjoying the sensations as Naruto continued to move his in and out of her hot, willing, wet, tight and soft vagina. Oh yes, right there Naruto-kun. This is glorious. The blonde Hokage was further pleasured by Naruto as he once more ed on her large, soft, firm, and well-formed S in the S, and with his use of chakra and dragon fire to further increase the pleasure being felt by the blonde Hokage, it was hardly a surprise when the two finally reached their release point. Tsunade came fast and hard. And Naruto came at the very same time, making both blonde lovers scream out in absolute bliss. Naruto-kun. Tsunade-chan. The blonde Sannin couldn't help but feel her body being filled to the brim as she felt Naruto's hot and thick cum fill her vagina right to the limit. It was something she had not felt in quite a very long time, and she was very much in joy for it as she felt Naruto's cum fill the areas of her body and made her feel more alive than she had ever been at this moment and time, and it was good to her. She held Naruto tightly as she felt more of his cum fill her, and her orgasm was almost over as the pleasure flooded her very senses, and she wanted to remember this down to the very core of both her soul and her bones. Naruto felt like he was in heaven at this moment and time as he felt Tsunade's vagina milk his for all it had in him at the moment, and the feel of Tsunade's inner walls caressing and massaging his made Naruto feel like he was going to be drained of all his essence, but he was not going to mind that in the very least as he gave a few more thrusts for good measure, and as soon as he reached his limit, he slowly pulled out of Tsunade's wet vagina and watched as some of his cum came out and was there in Tsunade's vagina. You were so good, Naruto-kun. That was also the same time when the cage bushin that were around Shizune also reached their limits and came hard. They covered the Jonin with their cum from her face to her Essen body, and that was enough to make Shizune cum hard as well as she shouted out her joy. However, she was far from satisfied at the moment as she directed attention to the real Naruto. Naruto could only gasp as the cage bushin that had surrounded Shizune finally poofed away, and he was quickly hit with the memories of the pleasure that the cage bushin had experienced. The pleasure had clouded Naruto's brain, so he was unable to discover quickly the ramifications of what had happened. Tsunade smiled as she moved aside, despite the fact that since she had come hard from what she and Naruto had done earlier, and she was more than willing to let Shizune have her turn. Shizune was covered in the cum of all four cage bushin, and her eyes were glazed over with lust, passion, desire and more as she moved over to Naruto and quickly kissed him from behind. Naruto-kun, I want you now, please. Yes, Shizune-chan. Shizune blushed as she quickly got on top of Naruto and quickly placed her hips in position with Naruto's at that moment, and she then lowered her hips and both of them ed out loud as Shizune didn't hesitate and took in Naruto's full length. Her vagina was so wet that there was nothing that was going to stop that from happening, and Shizune cried out loudly as she felt herself being full to the brim, and the pleasure for her was very much welcome at this point and time. As soon as she felt Naruto's fill her to the very limits of her body, she ed out loudly to Naruto. You're so deep, Naruto-kun. I feel so full. You're so tight, Shizune-chan. Make me feel good, Naruto-kun. Naruto nodded and used his chakra and dragon fire to give him more energy, and he began to move his hips, lifting Shizune up, and as soon as he moved back down, this allowed Shizune's vaginal walls to massage, grip, and caress his in a very wonderful way that made her scream and out her joy and pleasure at that moment. As soon as Naruto got his rhythm into play, Shizune began to move her hips as well, further adding pleasure to what she was feeling at this point and time. The two continued to pick up speed and power as time passed, while Tsunade observed all the while, still feeling the effects of her amazing orgasm, and was more than content to watch and regain both her strength and her drive. And the sight of Shizune and Naruto moving as one being and hearing the sounds of smelling it thick in the air, and the sight of the other kunoichi being thoroughly pleasured by Naruto's cage bushin was more than enough to make her even very happy. Naruto-kun, harder, deeper. Shizune-chan. The two continued to make their moves on one another at that moment, and the pleasure continued to mount for the both of them as Naruto continued to move his hips to drive himself even deeper into Shizune's wet and throbbing vagina, while Shizune moved her own hips to take in as much of Naruto's own into her vagina as her inner walls caressed and held Naruto's in as best they could. Shizune was in heaven at the moment as more and more pleasure flooded her body, and she wanted it to never end. Naruto likewise focused his chakra and dragon fire to arouse Shizune even further, and the results were worth it as Shizune wailed in pleasure and joy at each thrust of Naruto's into her wet vagina. Naruto moved upwards, and the two shared a deep and hot kiss with one another as Naruto moved hips as best he could, while Shizune did the very same thing at this moment. Naruto also touched Shizune's S, and the Jonin relished the contact that she was getting at this moment and time, and the fact that she and Naruto were in a deep and utterly hot kiss with one another was also making her all the more excited and aroused as Naruto's use of his chakra and dragon fire to touch in intensity the pleasure she felt by rousing her pleasure centers. It didn't take very long for the two to finally reach their respective limits as Naruto thrust harder and deeper into Shizune's wet as Shizune drove her hips faster on Naruto's, which was moving in and out of her vagina due to their combined actions at that moment. And it was not long before the release they both craved and lusted for came and hit them hard. Naruto-kun. Shizune-chan. The medical nin and Jonin apprentice of Tsunade screamed out her lover's name, and so did he as they both came at the very same time. Shizune felt Naruto's cum fill her body as the hot, thick and strong cum flooded every corner of her body and made her body feel more alive as it made her become more energized as she and Naruto then kissed each other very deeply as she felt herself being filled to the very limit of her body at this point and time. It was so good that she couldn't help but grind her hips to further increase her pleasure and that of Naruto's own pleasure as well. Naruto himself felt like he was once more being drained of his essence by Shizune, but he was not bothered by that in the least as he moved his hips as he unleashed more of his cum deeply into Shizune's hungry vagina and the feel of her inner walls milking him to the point that he felt like Shizune wanted to take him into the very center of her own self, and that made him feel even more aroused as his final thrusts made him feel how her inner walls were caressing and milking him for all that he had at the moment. As he pulled away from Shizune, he got to see some of his cum moving out of her wet and dripping vagina, and the sight made him feel something that was to be described as delicious pleasure and desire. It was also when the Kage Bushin who were with Kurenai finally reached their limits. Naruto gasped in deep pleasure as the Kage Bushin that flanked and occupied Kurenai finally poofed away and the Jonin was now alone, covered in the cum of the 3 Kage Bushin who were with her. The blonde Chunin was still beset by the pleasure of his orgasm with Shizune that he had not yet seen the trick of using Kage Bushin. She stood up and smiled seductively at Naruto as she too was covered in both her sweat and the hot and thick cum of all 3 Kage Bushin who had kept her fully pleasured and aroused at the moment. He could only watch in a pleasurable state of mind as Kurenai slinked up to him and smiled warmly at him. "You're so good, Naruto-kun. Ready for me?" "Yes. Good." Naruto barely had time to react when Kurenai kissed him deeply, and then she proceeded to kiss in her way to his chest and then all the way to his stomach and touched her special seal where the dragons wear, as well as the seal placed there by the Yondaime all those years ago. She gave it a parting kiss, and then as she reached his, she merely kissed and at the tip. Unmindful of what had transpired between Shizune, Tsunade and Naruto, after all, she had taken great care of herself, and both the previous kunoichi were exceptionally talented and top-notch medical nin, so she was not that worried at the moment. Kurenai smiled at the lustful and passionate look Naruto had, and she quickly turned about and showed her dripping wet vagina to Naruto while she was on her hands and knees and only had to shake her butt to send the message, along with her words. "Come on, Naruto-kun, this position will make us both feel good." Naruto needed no further invitation at this point as he moved up and then grabbed Kurenai's hips and pushed his right into Kurenai's wet vagina, and it slid deeply into the red-eyed Jonin's vagina without any trouble, and Kurenai arched her head back and ed out loudly in pleasure as she finally felt her lovers go deep into her eager and hungry body. "Oh yes. Right there, Naruto-kun. This feels so good." The Jonin ed out loudly and began to move her hips as Naruto also got into the swing of things as they slowly started out to get used to both the position and to find their needed pace and rhythm. And as soon as they were able to establish this pattern and rhythm, the two went at it as Naruto reached with his hands and once more used his chakra and dragon fire to touch Kurenai's hips, spine, neck, and then to her joy and pleasure, her auras as well. "Oh yes, Kurenai-chan." The two lovers finally got the rhythm right, and Naruto and Kurenai were mating wild animals in heat, and the two cared very little on who was watching them at the moment, while Tsunade and Shizune were enjoying the pleasure and sight of Naruto and Kurenai together at the moment as the red-eyed woman's face showed the pleasure and bliss which she was feeling thanks to Naruto, whose hands were covered in blue chakra and gold, white dragon fire, as well as his lips and tongue as heat her spine and shoulder blades. Kurenai couldn't help herself any longer as she leaned backwards and the two shared a deep and passionate kiss, and the two lovers were deep into one another as Naruto continued to pump his in and out of Kurenai's soaking wet vagina, and the Jonin finally moved away and was able to keep herself stable as Naruto continued to kiss and fondle her body to the heights of pleasure while he continued to move his in and out of her dripping wet vagina and drove her to the ends of her limits. It was then that both of them finally reached their limits. Kurenai-chan. Naruto-kun. Kurenai was in heaven. There was nothing in her mind that could clearly describe what she was feeling at this very moment as she orgasmed and felt Naruto's hot, thick and strong cum fill every corner of her body and made her feel complete and full at this moment. She felt Naruto move his hips a bit more, sending aftershocks of pleasure down her body, and she couldn't help but sigh as she felt more of his cum fill her body to the brim. Naruto as well was feeling the end as he felt Kurenai's inner walls milk and caress his, taking as much of his essence as she could. The blonde ninja felt like he was going to faint at the sheer amount of times that he had cum, but he was not going to let this stop him from enjoying this as much as he could as he moved forward and kissed Kurenai when she turned her head to face him. The two kissed each other deeply as Naruto slowly pulled out of her wet and dripping vagina and saw the same sight of her wet and throbbing vagina loosening a few drops of his cum. It was then that all the remaining Kage Bushin who were with Anko at the moment finally orgasmed as they covered the Jonin in their cum, and the Jonin lapped up as much as she could and smiled seductively and passionately as she looked to see the looks of pleasure and bliss on the faces of Tsunade, Shizune and Kurenai, and now she was ready for her own turn at this point and time. Naruto was once more floored by the sensations and feelings of the last of the remaining Kage Bushin who had finally poofed away, and he was so lost in the pleasure that he was unable to discover the hidden power of using the Kage Bushin at this point and time. Anko was covered in the cum of the Kage Bushin who had entertained her at the moment, and she couldn't help but see the looks of bliss on her fellow kunoichi, and she was eager for more at this point and time, and she had a very wicked idea on how to add pleasure to Naruto. As soon as she got Naruto's attention with a torrid kiss of her own, she whispered in Naruto's ear. I have a very wicked idea, but I hope you can handle this, Naruto-kun. After all this, I can handle anything. The Jonin grinned and decided to place Naruto's words to the test. She got him to stand up and she wrapped her arms around him, and to Naruto's surprise, she jumped up a bit and then wrapped her legs around his waist and she spoke. Time to prove your words, Naruto-kun. Let me ride you. Naruto quickly got the idea and then used his chakra and dragon fire to boost his strength and stamina, and coupled with his dragon-enhanced physical form, he was more than ready for this monumental task as he felt his body fully recover. Despite her desire for this position she heard so much about, Anko hoped that Naruto was ready for this and was not going to get hurt the very second they started moving with one another at this moment and time. She didn't have to think on that for long as Naruto. He was able to carefully guide Anko, and her vagina was in the right position, and he gently lowered his lover on his, and Anko cried out as she was now on top of the real Naruto's, and the feel of it in her vagina filled her to the brim as this position allowed her maximum depth, and Naruto him. Naruto-kun. You are so big. Anko-chan. You are so hot. Anko felt her body slide down Naruto's length until she felt him touch the very entrance to her womb, and that sensation she felt excited her to no end as she hugged Naruto tightly. The dark-haired Jonin hoped that Naruto would have enough strength for what he was about to do at this monument and time, but despite the danger, she was feeling very eager for this thing to happen to her right now. Naruto knew that this was going to be tiring, but his training and his natural strength was a lot better than before due to his enhancements and his long training in the arts of being a dragon champion as a Konoha ninja. After all, his training had paid off as his stamina, strength, intellect, and other abilities were above the level he had before. And he was now more than a match for some of the higher-ranking ninja in Konoha. But for now, that was out of his mind at the moment, as he had every intention on focusing on pleasuring Anko in his own unique way and making her feel the extent of his lust, passion, and desire for her. With that, he began to move his hips and legs, and sure enough, despite having never done this before at all and having only read about it, the pleasure in this position was worth it all. Anko ed as this allowed her to fully take in Naruto's full length, and the way he slid in and out of her vagina was undeniably beautiful at that moment. The two lovers began to pick up the pace as Anko allowed Naruto to set the pace of their actions as Kurenai, Tsunade, and Shizune watched on the side, all three women marveling that Naruto still had the energy and power to do all this after what he had done with them previously. This naturally gave the women plenty of new ideas that they were going to try on Naruto the very second he was done with Anko, as the dark-haired Jonin was enjoying every sensation right down to the roots of her hair and her toes. Naruto-kun. So good. More. I feel so happy. Anko-chan. Naruto could feel Anko's sweat and cum-covered form sliding sleekly on his, and while it had made holding her a bit harder than normal, he was not going to relent as he held her tightly, but not without hurting her too much. The last thing he wanted to do at this moment of passion was to hurt his lover in any fashion, and the feel of her wetness flowing down was arousing as well. Anko was feeling the pleasure grow by the second as Naruto continued to thrust deeply into her. She was happy that Naruto was willing to try it out as long as Naruto was doing this to her, and this position did allow her to be able to feel Naruto's going deep into her as he touched her most sensitive spots at that moment. The two lovers were ing out their joy and pleasure at this moment as the sounds of their lovemaking filled their shelter, and the smell of was thick in the air, so thick that one could cut a knife through it at that moment. Naruto-kun, you're inside me, so deep. More. Anko-chan. You feel good. Oh yes. It naturally didn't take very long for both of them to finally reach the limits as they shouted out their orgasms at the very same time. Naruto-kun. Anko-chan. Naruto felt his body slowly reach his limits and he slowly lay back down and Anko decided to be nice to her lover as she got off of him. The two however gave each other a deep kiss and Anko moved to the side, allowing Naruto see a small moving mixture of her cum and his own moving down Anko's leg. It was over, for now. As Naruto fell back on the bed, utterly exhausted from the nearly 6 to 7 hour run with the 4 mature kunoichi, he couldn't help but wonder if this was going to be nothing more than a dream that he was having, but his pleasure-filled brain told him otherwise and before he could relax, he was being stared at by Tsunade, Shizune, Anko, and Kurenai. The blonde Hokage moved towards him and smiled warmly at him. You were great Naruto-kun, a little improvement is in order though, but overall you were very nice. And don't get me or, Anko, Kurenai, and Shizune wrong, we wanted this and we would never do this if we didn't care about you at all, we planned this for days, and we hoped it was worth it to you. It is. I guess no one in Konoha will know about this. Right you are. Now is not the time for it to be revealed yet Naruto-kun, I don't want you to be chased by a mob of angry male ninja all day for the rest of your life if they found out about this, and I am not in the mood to hear that Jiraiya found out about it, so keep it to yourself Naruto-kun. Tsunade then kissed Naruto on the cheek and smiled slyly. And if you keep this a secret, then you can always give any of us a call if you start getting lonely, okay Naruto-kun? We'll be more than willing to keep you company in more ways than one, right ladies? Oh yes, give me a call if you want to Naruto-kun, I'm sure I can be around. Shizune said with a smile. I'm ready to go anytime you are lover boy. You are just too darn tasty to leave alone. Anko smiled with relish as she'd her lips. You are a very good person Naruto-kun, I'll be willing to be with you if you would let. Kurenai said with a smile and a deep blush that matched her own red eyes. All this made Naruto feel like he was in heaven at the moment and Tsunade saw that and she grinned. Ready for other go at our lover here, ladies. I think we still have plenty of time left before morning comes, and this time, we are going all out with all the positions we know. Yes. The 4 women moved towards Naruto and he could only gulp and pray that he will survive what is about to happen to him. However, he reaffirmed his previous thoughts on this situation before. I am going to die. But if this is the way I am going to die, no way am I going to complain about this one bit. In no way am I ever going to spill the beans about this to anyone in Konoha and certainly not the pervy sage. That train of thought was cut short as the 4 women were now on top of him and were now going to make their moves on Naruto and sure enough, Naruto was going to be in for the night of his life. Naruto could tell the Hinata was very eager and willing for more and he had every intention to make her enjoy it as he continued to kiss Hinata deeply. As soon as the kiss was over, Hinata panted as she felt her heart beat even faster from all the sensations that she had been feeling ever since Naruto had kissed her to near senselessness. She could see Naruto smile at her and before she could react, Naruto made his move. He reached down and then played with her S gently, rolling her S and massaging her S, making her and shout out in pleasure. Naruto-kun. Naruto smiled and it was then that he saw Sakura and the others who were blushing and seeing the whole thing. Naruto smiled and nodded a bit and spoke. Come on, aren't you all wanting to get involved? Sakura and the others looked at one another and Sakura was the first to make the move as she moved closer and then Naruto kissed Sakura deeply and the pink-haired kunoichi could only blush bright red at the sensations that flowed all over her body at the mere touch of Naruto's lips and tongue on her own. Hinata was not content and she got up and began to kiss in Naruto's hard-muscled form and she relished the taste of his skin on her mouth and tongue. Sakura and Naruto were deeply kissing one another and it was then that Sakura decided to try a trick that she had learned from her medical training and focused her chakra into her hands and tongue. She wondered about how this would work and hoped that what she had learned would prove useful and in fact it was as Naruto ed even more in pleasure at her actions and she was happy that she had been able to understand how it was done. As the two finally stopped kissing one another both Sakura and Hinata began to lavish Naruto's body with kisses and as well and as soon Naruto lay back on the bed, both Sakura and Hinata moved to give Naruto a three-way kiss and it was very hot for the women who were with Naruto and it didn't take very long for Sakura and Hinata were joined by both Ino and Kin. the two kunoichi who had decided to join in decided to have their own taste of Naruto as Ino and Kin looked at his and they began to move towards it, and as soon as they were close enough, Ino moved first and began to touch Naruto's, marveling at the feel of Naruto's in her hands at the moment. It felt like velvet-covered steel which was hot as well as she stroked it, and it was not long before Kin also got involved with it as well as the former sound kunoichi also took her shot at stroking Naruto's, and she also marveled at the feel of it, and the two of them couldn't help but feel very excited at the prospect of what they were going to do with Naruto at this moment, and that excited them even more as they had very vivid ideas. However, Naruto had his own ideas. His experiences with Tsunade, Kurenai, Shizune, and Anko taught him how to pleasure some of the different kinds of women, and now was the time to see how those lessons could be used on Hinata, Sakura, Ino, and Kin, and now was a good a time as any at this point. He spoke then to them. I think we need to take this slowly, we have all night after all. For some reason this excited the four kunoichi at this point, and Naruto made his move as he reached for Ino and then Hinata and kissed them both in a three-way kiss, and the three of them were enjoying this while Sakura and Kin were watching all the while as Naruto continued to kiss the two. It was not long before Naruto moved to Sakura and Kin, and without hesitation, the three kissed in the same fashion. Naruto then decided to move off the bed, but not before holding Hinata's hand, and as they were off the bed he made Hinata bend down as she stood on the floor, and she placed her hands on the bed, and with that done at the moment, he placed his between her legs and slowly began to move his hips while touching her back and playing with her using the same trick that he had learned from his time with Tsunade, Kurenai, Anko, and Shizune. Ooh, Naruto-kun, this feels so. Hinata was blushing bright red as she felt her body literally burn in pleasure at Naruto's actions at the moment, as she felt her body seeming burning at the touch of Naruto's actions. She had dreamed of this for so long, and now that her dreams were finally coming true, it was driving her wild to know that she was doing what she only dreamed of with Naruto at this moment. Hinata turned to see Naruto facing her, and the two kissed one another deeply to Hinata's joy and pleasure. The others watched as Naruto continued to pleasure Hinata greatly despite the fact that he had not taken her virginity yet, and the sight of Hinata flushed pink and her face as crimson as they had ever seen, and with her essence size of pleasure, it was enough to make them wish they were in her place at the moment and getting the very same pleasure that she was getting at this moment and time. It was so much that Hinata finally reached her limit at this moment and time as she came hard. Hinata's body was covered in sweat and she ed out loud at the pleasure of her very first orgasm, and it was heavenly to her at this moment as she was with Naruto. She could feel the hunger she felt being satisfied for the time being, and even though she had hungered for the chance to finally feel Naruto's in the inner recesses of her vagina ever since this whole situation started, but this was not so bad at the moment. The pleasure nearly made Hinata fall to her knees at that moment, but she was still able to remain standing, and she panted deeply as she felt every nerve in her body tingle with her orgasm, and it was radiant to her at the moment. Her body was still feeling the effects, and he could no longer stand, and she was helped by Naruto as she lay on the bed, panting and gasping at the sensations that flooded her, and she was out of it. This allowed the other three kunoichi to make their own moves at that moment on Naruto. Naruto managed to resist the urge to cum himself and was able to calm down, but not before he was approached by Ino and Sakura. The two friends rivals smiled at Naruto and decided that it was their turn to get a shot at what Hinata had experienced, and Naruto decided to even things up for the pair as he kissed Sakura deeply, and when the lip lock was over, he then kissed Ino as well, and the blonde kunoichi blushed bright red at that as he moved on with the festivities. Naruto moved to kiss both Sakura and Ino in a three-way kiss, and he whispered something to both Sakura and Ino, and both of them blushed bright red at the idea, but they agreed and they sat down on the bed and both parted their legs to reveal the dripping wet vaginas before Naruto, and the blonde smiled at that and decided to see if what he had in mind would be a very useful idea. Both Ino and Sakura couldn't help but blush as Naruto ran his fingers on their bodies and gently played with their S&S for a moment as he moved to their flat stomachs and then all the way to their hips, and then he touched the patches of hair and smiled brightly at Sakura, who blushed even more and spoke to him. What, Naruto-kun? What are you smiling about? You are pink, even there, Sakura-chan, you're attractive. Sakura blushed bright red, and had he done that in a public place, she would have not hesitated to hit him on the face or the head for that remark, but not at this point and time, and she knew that Naruto was a lot different than before, so the only thing she could say in her defense was, "Promise me you will never say that again to anyone in Konoha, or you are going to be asking for it, Naruto-kun. Naruto smiled at that and kissed Sakura at the lips and her nose and replied. No one is going to know that from me, Sakura-chan. The pink-haired Kunoichi was happy, and then both she and Ino ed out loudly as they were suddenly assaulted by pleasurable sensations as Naruto began to play with their vaginas slowly and carefully as well. He was using his chakra once more in order to touch the pleasure centers of the women as he had learned to do before, and the results were certainly working as he started with their auras and the women ed out in pleasure. Their bodies were covered in sweat at the moment. Naruto-kun. Naruto smiled at that and used his chakra in his fingers to touch the pleasure centers in Sakura and Ino's bodies, and as soon as he was done, he could see that the two of them had gotten much more aroused as their juices were dripping out like a river, and he placed his fingers into position and pushed into both Sakura and Ino's respective vagina, and his fingers slid in easily, making them gasp in pleasure while he ed at the feel of the two Kunoichi's tight, wet, and soft inner walls, and he slowly moved his fingers in and out. Both Sakura and Ino were in heaven as Hinata and Kin watched the whole thing happen before them at the moment. Naruto decided to experiment and moved his fingers a bit more as well as moving them in and out, and this allowed him to locate the areas in their wet inner cores which would make both Sakura and Ino ever louder, as well as release more of their moisture. This feels so good. I feel like I'm going to faint. Naruto-kun. There. Naruto-kun. Right there. Oh yes. Both Ino and Sakura were feeling even more excited as Naruto continued to use his fingers on their vaginas, and they were sweating as the smell of began to fill the room. However, Hinata and Kin were not going to remain idle for long as the two of them got behind both Ino and Sakura, and they could only watch as Naruto continued to pleasure their companions at the moment. Naruto, however, had other ideas and spoke. Hinata-chan, Kin-chan, care to help Ino-chan and Sakura-chan enjoy this more? Hinata and Kin blushed, and Kin decided to show the shy Hyuga how to do that as she got behind Ino and began to play with the S of the blonde-haired Kunoichi, and Hinata could only watch as Kin played with Ino's S as Naruto requested. She blushed but decided to do the very same thing, and she went to Sakura and does the same thing. Naruto relished the sight and continued to pleasure Ino and Sakura, who moved their heads to the side and were drooling a bit in the pleasure that he was giving them at the moment, and it made him feel very happy to the reason that they were acting and feeling this way at the moment. As he continued to pleasure the two of them, it was not long before both Ino and Sakura would both come, and come they did, and very hard as well. Naruto-kun. The two shouted as their bodies tensed up, and they ed out loudly as their orgasms flooded them a moment later. Sakura and Ino panted as the pleasure overwhelmed them, and they couldn't help but feel tired. Naruto then removed his fingers which were covered in their juices, and he gently smelled them and smiled as he'd his left hand that had Ino's juices before Ino, who despite being drunk on pleasure, blushed bright red, and when Naruto cleaned his fingers, they two of them kissed once more, and Ino ed at the fact that she could taste herself with Naruto's own mingling taste. Naruto then moved to Sakura, whose juices coated his right hand's fingers, and like before, he smelled them with a warm and seductive smile and then ed them clean before Sakura, who blushed deeply at the sight, and then the two of them kissed one another, and she didn't mind the fact that she could taste herself as well as a faint taste of Ino's own juices. Naruto looked as both Hinata and Kin were eager for their turn, and they moved aside as both Sakura and Ino lay back, and the three of them allowed the two to rest a bit, and that allowed Naruto to make Hinata and Kin take the same posture, and he slowly did the very same thing, with Hinata on his left and Kin on his right. And like before, he ran his hands on their bodies and then their S, playing with the mounds with his hands, and then he made his way to their stomachs and then to their vaginas, and he could see the patches of wet soft fur over their wet vaginas, and he was eager to make both Hinata and Kin scream his name in pleasure just as Sakura and Ino did. Hinata and Kin ed out loudly as Naruto touched their auras, and with that the two women screamed out in absolute pleasure and bliss, and Naruto made his move as he pushed his fingers into their vaginas, and both women gasped as Naruto slowly moved his fingers in and out, and the two women were ing and crying out loud as Naruto was moving his fingers to touch the pleasure areas of their vagina and them cry out even more in pleasure with the use of chakra to touch every pleasure center and nerve in their bodies at the moment. While Ino and Sakura were able to recover slowly and were now looking at the whole thing, and they could only watch as both Hinata and Kin were ing out in pleasure and bliss at the moment. Naruto-kun, this is so good. More Naruto-kun. Sakura and Ino looked on, and they made their way to the trio, and in the idea of turn about as fair play, they massaged Hinata and Ino's S, with Ino doing the same thing to Kin while Sakura did the same thing to Hinata, and it was not long before all the pleasure drove both Hinata and Kin to the brink as they came at the same time. Naruto-kun. The sight of Kin and Hinata coming at the very same time was very erotic to the blonde Chunin, and he repeated the same action. He'd cleaned the fingers which had been in Hinata's of her juices before her, and the blushing Hyuga heiress kissed Naruto deeply at that and not minded tasting her own juices, and he did the very same thing with in front of Kin with his fingers that had her moisture on them, and they kissed, and all four women were blushing at this moment and time. Who knew that Naruto was this good when it came to pleasing women? Naruto then created a group of Kage Bushin, numbering 4, and they formed a pair of 2 as they went over to Sakura and Hinata to keep the two of them company for the time being, as he knew that he needed to focus on preserving his energy in order to make the night last longer and make it even more memorable for the 4 kunoichi who were with him at the moment. Kin and Ino were blushing bright red as Naruto kissed the two of them in a three-way kiss, and the blonde wasted no time as he kissed the two of them as Hinata and Sakura were busy playing with both themselves and the Kage Bushin that Naruto summoned to keep them company, while he made sure that both Kin and Ino were not left out of the fun. Naruto-kun. Both kunoichi spoke softly as they kissed the blonde and each other as well. This was a first to both Ino and Kin, but it was not that bad at the moment. As the three stopped kissing one another, Naruto kissed Ino deeply, and the blonde kunoichi could only yelp in pleasure as Naruto used his hands to caress her in her vagina, which was very wet at that moment as Naruto continued to kiss Ino, and Kin wanted to get into the act as well. The former sound kunoichi was not out of it forever as Naruto decided to give her some company as he used his Kage Bushin once more, and Kin was now surrounded by a pair of Kage Bushin, and the sound kunoichi was more than willing to play with the Kage Bushin as she kissed one while the other Kage Bushin ran his hands over her back, then her thighs, butt, and relying on the knowledge that it had gained from what had happened a few weeks before. Kin was receiving the full benefits as well as Sakura and Hinata were at the moment. This left Ino to Naruto's ministrations, and she was more than eager for the chance as she ed out loudly at Naruto's gentle touch. Naruto-kun. You seem to know how to pleasure a woman, I like it. Ino gasped as Naruto moved his hand which was on her and then he moved it to her thighs and began to rub her thighs gently, and he then reached for her stomach and he began to trace his fingers on the area of her hips, and he then made his way to her stomach and he made his way to her once more, and Ino couldn't help but feel her body become hotter and she felt another amount of wetness flood her body. The 4 young kunoichi had no idea that Naruto was testing what he had been subjected to when Tsunade and Shizune had done with their own chakra, and now that he had done it as well, he was going to see how well he would be able to do it. Ino was in heaven as she felt her body alight with pleasure as Naruto touched her body with his hands which had his chakra in them, and she couldn't help but feel even more energized and aroused at this moment and time, and she wanted to touch and taste Naruto so badly. Naruto-kun, you're not being fair. Oh, all right then. Ino looked as Naruto moved back and was now in front of her, and he gave her a very warm and simple smile. It's your turn, Ino-san. Ino blushed as she looked at her companions at the moment to see how they were doing. Hinata was in heaven as she was being kissed by a Kage Bushin behind her on the lips with her head turned while massaging her at the moment, while another washing her wet vagina, and the Hyuga heiress could only scream in pleasure and bliss. The Hyuga heiress was standing there and she couldn't handle the pleasure being given to her at this very moment as it was driving her wild. Sakura was likewise in the same situation as the pair of Kage Bushin who were with her were busy with their own actions on her at the moment. One was busying her vagina as she sat on the bed and the other was right next to her, and the two were kissing one another deeply at the moment, and as soon as that was over, the Kage Bushin stood up and Sakura'd his gently, and as she continued to kiss the Kage Bushins, and she then took it into her mouth and began to move her head back and forth while the other Kage Bushin was stilling her vagina ravenously. Kin was getting in the act with her own Kage Bushin as well at the moment, and she was loving it as she was in a three-way kiss with 2 of the Kage Bushin while, and when they broke the kiss, the 2 Kage Bushin of Naruto presented their to her and she was eager to try them out and did so. Ino couldn't help but gaze at Naruto's long and hard, marveling at the sight of her lovers as she touched it gently and slowly, and he smiled as Naruto ed out deeply at that action of hers, and that served to embolden the blonde kunoichi to try harder as she continued to touch Naruto's, and the blonde chunin smiled at that. Ino continued with her actions and Naruto made sounds of approval and smiled at her, and Ino blushed back at him as she finally gathered the courage to do what she wanted to do. Ino slowly Naruto's from tip to the shaft and all the way to the base, and she felt very happy to be able to do this to Naruto, as she had heard so much about this was something that men loved receiving from women, and while some of the women in Konoha would not like doing this, others swore by it that it was very effective in pleasing a man. She knew her parents would not be happy, though she had no doubt that they did this during their times together, and she had planned this for a surprise for Sasuke, but she had a feeling this was far better for Naruto at the moment, and from the looks of things, she was right. Naruto groaned out as Ino finally took in his full length into her hot mouth, and he groaned at the feel of it as Ino slowly took in his length. Ino-chan, that's it. Ino smiled mentally as she could tell from Naruto's reactions that she was doing it right at the moment, and she couldn't help but feel very happy with the way Naruto looked as she continued to in his with her mouth and tongue at the moment. Naruto reached for Ino's back and ran his hands on her back, using his chakra to touch her pleasure centers to further improve her pleasure at the moment, and he did so slowly and carefully, and the results were enough to make Ino out in pleasure. Naruto managed to resist the feeling of orgasm while Ino was unable to hold on, and she orgasmed first after time passed. Ino-chan, I think it's time you have some company. Naruto used the hand seals, and Ino was greeted by 3 Kage Bushin, and she ed as she got into the mood of being with the Kage Bushin, and to Naruto's surprise when the 4 Kage Bushin who were with Hinata and Sakura made their moves towards both Ino and Kin. While Sakura and Hinata were on their way towards Naruto, and Hinata could only out in pleasure as she kissed Naruto deeply, and Naruto quickly rolled and he was now on top of Hinata, and when they parted from their kiss, Sakura also kissed him deeply. Hinata was panting with great effort as she tried to recover from all the pleasure and bliss that filled her body at the moment as she looked at Naruto, who was giving her a very loving smile, and she could only smile back as she moved closer to him, and as soon as she was close enough, she was kissing him once more. It was then that Sakura moved in and whispered to the Hyuga heiress. Hey Hinata-chan, daughter, you ready for this? Hinata blushed brightly, and that made Naruto curious as the 2 kunoichi moved and sat next to one another, and Naruto could only wonder just what the 2 ladies were up to at the moment, and it was not long before he got his answer as Sakura and Hinata pressed their bodies together, and to his absolute surprise, Sakura gently kissed Hinata while both of them were blushing as they did so. It was enough to get Naruto hard and ready to go in a heartbeat. As soon as Sakura and Hinata were done kissing each other lightly, the white-eyed Hyuga heiress couldn't help but blush at the sight of Naruto's fully erect, and Sakura noted that and spoke to Hinata. Come on Hinata-chan, let's make Naruto-kun have fun. Hi. Both Hinata and Sakura moved towards Naruto's, and then to Naruto's utter delight, the 2 women positioned themselves over him, and Sakura was next to his head with his head between her parted legs, and Hinata was on top of Naruto's hips, and she gently rubbed Naruto's at the moment, and then to Naruto's pleasure, Hinata began to rub her wet vagina's lips on his with her oris there as well. The result was Naruto-ing out loud and panting as the sensations began to flood his body while he'd Sakura's dripping wet vagina and tasted her moisture once more, and it was certainly worth tasting at the moment as he lapped up her folds in her, making Sakura gasp out loud in pleasure while Hinata was reveling in the movements of her hips on Naruto's as it touched her body in ways that were driving her wild with pleasure. It was amazing, and Naruto was enjoying the sensations greatly at that moment, and as soon as he was getting into the mood of things the women were giving him as he gave back as well, he used his chakra once more to pleasure Sakura as he touched her pleasure centers, and the results were worth it all as Sakura ed out in great pleasure, had bliss at the sensations that were being sent through every corner of her body at this moment, and it was not long before Hinata was also getting it as she cried out even more as Naruto could feel her moisture flow out and cover his at the moment, and it was erotic indeed for Naruto. As the 2 kunoichi continued to pleasure Naruto, they finally came hard, and Naruto lapped up as much of Sakura's juices as he could manage at the moment, and it was more than he hoped for as he found her to be sweet to the taste, and he liked that a lot as she came a bit more, while he felt Hinata's own juices cover his, and he smiled. Sakura panted and she moved off of Naruto, and so did Hinata, and the 2 were very eager for the taste of what they were wanting again, and that was when both of them went to Naruto's and the 2 began to take turns and kissing it, making Naruto out loud in pleasure. He however got up and stood on the bed, and both Sakura and Hinata knelt before him, and they smiled as they took turns touching Naruto's. Go ahead Hinata-chan, Sakura-chan. I know you both want this. Both women smiled brightly at that, and Hinata was the first, and she didn't mind the fact that she tasted her own moisture at the moment as she continued to and kiss Naruto's at the moment. Sakura then took her turn and did Naruto's as well and also kissed and did it, and then the two of them began to take turns as they'd and ed Naruto's, and Naruto was relishing it as well at the moment. Naruto reached down and massaged the heads of both the female kunoichi, and he smiled at them and they smiled back. Naruto-kun. Naruto looked to see both Sakura and Hinata blushing and continuing their actions at the moment as he turned to see the Kage Bushin having their way with both Kin and Ino at the moment, and the two were very eager for this at the moment, and it was going to be a very special night for the two kunoichi as they ed out with great joy and bliss at the sensations that were flooding their bodies at the moment. Naruto could see the expressions on the faces of the two kunoichi, and it turned him on so much that he slowly began to move his hips unconsciously as well. Sakura and Hinata were surprised, but the two decided to take that in stride, and with a nod from the pink-haired kunoichi, Hinata was the first to take a shot at this moment. Hinata relaxed her head and allowed Naruto to move his in and out of his mouth, and while she was enjoying this, she couldn't help but notice that Naruto was moving a bit faster as well. He was holding her head tightly and she was getting a bit worried. Sakura saw that and gently touched Naruto's testicles, and that was enough to make Naruto look down, and he saw what he was doing and he was not happy at that, and he reacted accordingly as he slowed down his actions and loosened his grip on Hinata's head, and he slowly began to move his hips back and forth. The sight of Hinata doing this with Naruto served to excite Sakura as she began to touch and caress Hinata's s with one of her hands, which was also covered in chakra, while she used her other hand with the same chakra on Naruto's leg and hips, making Naruto all the more excited at the moment. Hinata herself felt very odd at first doing this, but the fact that she wanted to make Naruto happy and he was happy made her ignore it, as she was being given a very good idea of what Naruto would do to her vagina soon enough, and the feeling, while odd, was not bad or disgusting in any way but excited her all the more at the moment. Ino and Kin were in heaven as the Kage Bushin who were surrounding them were making things even hotter. The blonde kunoichi genin was being attended to by at least 5 Kage Bushin at the moment, and all of them were busy kissing and touching Ino into near bliss. One was kissing Ino deeply, while 2 others were ing and kissing her s at the moment, while one was busying and kissing her vagina, and the last was running his hands on Ino's legs, touching in places that apparently were exciting the blonde-haired woman at the moment. Kin was being attended by the other Kage Bushin at the moment, and she was on her knees while caressing 2s in her hands, and she was ing the other one with great passion and desire at this point and time. One of the Kage Bushin was behind her, kissing her back and fondling her s, while another using its hands and fingers to touch and play with her wet vagina at the moment, and that made Kin even more hot by the second, and that was shown as more and more of her juices were flowing out at the moment. Naruto was holding onto Hinata's head and slowly moved his hips as his went in and out of Hinata's mouth, as the Hyuga heiress was blushing bright red and ing out in pleasure at the sensations that were flooding his body at the moment, and it was driving him wild at the second, and it was not long before he finally came hard into Hinata's mouth. Ah! Hinata gulped and took in as much of Naruto's cum as she could manage, and to her absolute joy, the taste of her lover's cum was sweet and delicious to her taste buds at the moment. She loved the taste and vowed to savor it for as long as possible. She took in as much as she could at the moment, and when she moved back, some of Naruto's cum landed on her face and s. Sakura then spoke to Hinata. "How does Naruto-kun taste, Hinata-chan?" "He's sweet, Sakura-chan, it tastes wonderful." "All right. Let me have a taste as well." Naruto himself felt his body shudder with his first release of the day, and it made him feel very relaxed. He then saw a very interesting sight as Hinata swallowed his cum and Sakura washing off some of the cum from Hinata's face and even from her s, and that made Hinata, and he watched as both women kissed one another before him. The moment he came for the first time this night was also when the Kage Bushin that were around Ino finally came and poofed away, making the blonde kunoichi blush as she was covered in her sweat and the cum of the Kage Bushin at the very same time. Ino ed and merely lay there, basking in the sensations and feelings for the moment, but it was not long before she moved towards Naruto, eager for a taste of the real Naruto's own cum. Sakura then made her move at this point, and Hinata moved aside as she was still enjoying the taste of Naruto's cum, and Hinata didn't mind that at all as she was willing to let Sakura make her move on this situation as well. Sakura herself was eager for more and made that known slowly as she took in Naruto's and with a slight nod. Naruto began to move his hips and was now moving his in and out of Sakura's mouth, and Sakura ate out as she relished this sensation, and like Hinata, she was eager to feel Naruto's in her vagina when given the chance, and the pleasure was growing at the moment for her. Naruto had to admit that the sight of him moving his in and out of Sakura's mouth was very erotic, and the thought of doing the same thing to her wet vagina was making him all the more eager and excited at the thought of it, and he moved his hips slightly faster as Sakura took it in stride. It was not long before Naruto finally reached his limits and came hard with a shout, and Sakura could only get ready for it as it came. Sakura-chan. Sakura could only hold on as she took in Naruto's cum, and just like before, she found Naruto's cum to be sweet tasting and something that was very enjoyable to her taste buds. Which seemed to go against what she had heard about from the idle gossip she heard about. All in all, she couldn't help but feel the warmth of it and the thickness as well. As she moved back, Naruto was still going strong as he fired several more streams that landed on Sakura's face and she couldn't help but smile, and she swallowed Naruto's cum, and it was then that Ino gently nudged Sakura, showing that she was in the mood to take her own turn at this situation. But of course the blonde asked the question. How does he taste? Sakura smiled and replied with a wink at both Ino and Naruto. Naruto-kun is sweet. You should try some Ino. With that word, Sakura took a portion of the cum on her face and allowed Ino to sample a bit, and as soon as Ino tasted that, she smiled and looked at Naruto, and she was having a very hungry gleam in her eye, and she moved in and took hold of Naruto's and cleaned it with her tongue, and as soon as that was done, she looked at Naruto and spoke. Are you ready, Naruto-kun? Oh yes. Ino smiled and took her time to kiss Naruto's, and without any further hesitation, took in Naruto's deep into her mouth, and as soon as she could take in as much as she could handle, she relaxed and let her body get used to the sensations, since despite her aggressive action, she was still very much new at this, since her first attempt was somewhat cut short. But now she was eager for more. As soon as she felt ready, Ino began to move her head back and forth and was surprised to feel Naruto doing the very same thing, though his pace was much slower and more relaxed, and it made her all the more hotter. Naruto was lucky he still had plenty of stamina and energy left, as he had already orgasmed at least twice since this started out, but he was eager as he moved his hips in time with Ino's own movements of her head, and the feeling was utterly delicious at the moment, and since Ino had no intention of letting this pass, she was going to see things through the end while Hinata and Sakura watched, eager to see what will happen. Ino and Naruto were enjoying this situation immensely, and it was certainly something for the blonde chunin to see Ino moving her head in time with each thrust of his hips. Ino was a very nice person in real life, and it amazed him that she had developed feelings for him as well. Ino likewise would have never pictured herself doing this with Naruto of all people, but she couldn't help but feel that this was all right and was perfect as well. Naruto was not the complete dumb idiot like before. He had grown up. In fact, she could have bet that if he was like this in the academy, she would have been more attracted to him than Sasuke. She placed those thoughts out of her mind as she focused on and tasting Naruto's while he massaged her head and hair gently, making her all the more aroused as Naruto used his chakra and dragon fire to increase his stamina, and that was a good thing. The two finally reached the end as Naruto groaned out as he orgasmed for the third time this night. Ino took in Naruto's cum, and she relished the sweet flavor and found it greatly to her liking at that moment. As she took in as much as she could, she moved back and was hit by some still released streams of Naruto's cum, and some landed on her and chest as well as some were on her face. Ino then without reservation swallowed Naruto's thick and hot cum to her delight. It was also when Naruto came for the third time that the Kage Bushin who were with Kin also came and poofed away from existence, as the Kunoichi relished the feel of it all, and then she moved to Naruto and she was eager to state Naruto's cum herself, and without waiting, took in Naruto's, and Naruto nodded at the look of desperate passion, desire and lust in Kin's eyes as he moved his hips. Kin had heard about this before and was a bit frightened, but she was willing to do it if it was only with Naruto, and now that she was doing it, she hoped that she was going to be properly rewarded as she stayed there and allowed Naruto to do as he wished, and Naruto knew that as he moved a bit faster without hurting or choking Kin. Naruto looked at Kin and saw her deep blush on her face and her deep eyes, who looked at him with so much desire it was hard for him to picture her as a former enemy and someone who had tried to kill him before, and he recalled how they had met and how far they had come, and he couldn't help but touch Kin's face gently with his free hand, making her in pleasure at her touch. In Kin's mind, had she never met Naruto, this would have been her greatest nightmare come true, as she would have been humiliated, defiled and worse. Had this been done back in the Sound Village, it would have been a humiliating punishment, and it would have been far worse had it been done by an enemy to her. But because of Naruto, she was free of that fear in her past life, and now she relished these sensations and the need for fulfillment with the man who she owed her new life and cared for with all her heart. It didn't take very long for Naruto to finally orgasm once more, and he couldn't hold it anymore as he shouted out once more. Kin tasted Naruto's cum, and the taste of it was certainly sweet and delicious at the moment, and she couldn't help but love it as she took in as much as she could, and she slowly moved away as some of her lover's cum landed on her lips and s. Naruto sat back on the bed, and it was when he took a deep breath and then he used a body spell and a nature spell to get his energy back, as he was eager for the grand finale, and he felt the magic work as his fatigue was beginning to move away from his body and slowly disappear. The four kunoichi decided then to give Naruto a show that they knew most guys would love to see. They each took turns cleaning one another of Naruto's cum with their tongues, and the sight of the four womening off his cum from their faces and lips and then taking it in was more than enough visual stimulation to get Naruto back once more in full gear. It was then that Sakura and Hinata did something utterly distracting and delicious in Naruto's mind at the moment. Hinata lay on the bed and Sakura was now on top of the Hyuga heiress, and the two of them presented their dripping wet vaginas to Naruto, and the blonde was quick to catch on and quickly close the distance and smiled as he pushed his between the two women's vagina, and Hick was touching their oris as he moved his slowly and made the two women out loud as Naruto's was moving between their bodies and making them all the more hotter and aroused. As soon as he was sure that the two of them were ready, he moved out his and he positioned his and then slowly pushed his into Hinata first, and the white-eyed Hyuga heiress shouted out her joy as she felt Naruto's finally enter her wet, eager and undeniably hungry vagina. Naruto-kun. Naruto held onto Hinata's legs and wrapped them around his waist, and as soon as he was deep inside Hinata's vagina and marveled of the feel of her deep wetness, tightness, and softness of Hinata's vagina, and as soon as he was buried deep inside her, he relaxed and calmed himself, and also to help Hinata get used to him being inside her at the moment, as Hinata was still a virgin despite the fact that her ninja training had weakened her maidenhead. Hinata ed out loud as she felt Naruto's enter her before, and now that it was deep inside of her, she was utterly happy. She wanted this feeling of being united with Naruto in the most intimate and delicious way for so long, and now it was proving to be a dream come true for her at this moment and time. Naruto-kun, you're inside me. Sakura smiled at that and spoke to Hinata. How does he feel, Hinata-chan? Naruto-kun, feels so good. With that done, Naruto began to move his hips and so slowly in order to make sure that he would be able to pleasure Hinata properly, and it seemed that Hinata was enjoying it. As soon as he got a rhythm set, he directed his attention to Sakura and decided to also make her feel a great deal. Thanks for listening. In the next part. In the meantime, please leave a review. I would love to hear your feedback. Especially if it helps me improve the overall story.